Okay, good evening. Welcome to tonight's Parsha Behar, Bechukosai, two full interesting sedras. The first point this evening is from Parsha's Behar. The pasuk begins, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Behar Sinai. Lamer gives his name to the sedra, of course. Vadaber b'nei Yisrael v'mar tzalem ki sovei l'eretz asher ninosim lachem v'shov s'aretz Shabbos l'Hashem. The halacha of Shemitah. The question is, why does it say Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Behar Sinai Lamer? It should just say Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Lamer, as it always does. So Rashi addresses the question, and in the second box, if you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. Rashi famously says the famous question, Ma inyan shmita etzel har Sinai? Why on earth does the Torah here say har Sinai, just as we're about to go on to discuss Shemitah? Why here? Surely all of Torah, all of the mitzvahs were given at Sinai. Why single out Shemitah? Says Rashi, just like Shemitah, all of it in its entirety was given in all detail at Har Sinai. So too, all of the mitzvahs were given in their full detail at Har Sinai. But the question that Rashi doesn't address is why Shemitah? Presumably, the Torah could have chosen any of the mitzvahs to teach this rule, that just like X, all the details were said at Har Sinai, so to all the other mitzvahs, why is Shemitah chosen as the example? So in previous year, I mentioned the answer to that question from the Ksav Sefer. So let me review that before I give you a new answer that I came across in Rabbi Sefer. But if you take a look at the bottom of the page, the Ksav Sefer, he gives two answers. One in the name of his father, the Chasam Sefer, and then one his own. It's worth just reviewing that quickly. It's very interesting. Says the Ksav Sefer, quoting his father, the Chasam Sefer. Shemitah is special. Why? Shemitah shows that Torah is min hashamayim. Moshe didn't just make it up by himself. Because how on earth could he promise because the pasuk goes on to say that the produce is going to produce either 3 years worth of, or qualitatively or quantitatively, however it's understood, we discussed that in the past, but it's going to produce 3 times as much. In other words, the Chasam Sofer says that how could any human being give that assurance? The very fact that he can shows that Torah is min hashamayim, and therefore Shemitah is an example of something which is min hashamayim, and just like Shemitah is min hashamayim, so too all of mitzvahs are min hashamayim. That's the Chasam Sofer. Well, Anivas Daiti, the next answer, this Ksav Sofer himself, Nira Kaladei Shemitah Yachniya Ha'odam Libai. Very beautiful answer. That through Shemitah a person will submit himself. He'll be a bit humble. And he's not going to turn around and say, it's my strength and initiative and enterprise which explains my business success. Because if anybody's going to see the Yad Hashem, it's the farmer. He'll sort of humble himself. It's not just in order to accept and to receive Torah, one has to really submit and show a degree of humility. And this is a good segue into Rabbi Bender's explanation, because he understands that Shemitah is chosen as an example to teach the importance of humility. Now, you'll see why in a second. If you think about it, everything about Torah suggests that success in Torah comes to somebody who is humble. The location of Matan Torah itself, forget, the actual location teaches us that. The famous Medrash in Tehillim, if you look at the next box, great mountains came and said, let the Torah be given on us. We're familiar with the song, Please God Will Sing over Shavuos, or the kids sing, and the Har Tavor comes along and says, listen, my name is Har Tavor, I think that I'm the appropriate mountain upon which the Torah should be given. I'm the tallest of all the mountains. I was so tall that the Mea Mabul didn't cover my entirety. I was over the Mabul. And the other one says, no, my name is Har Carmel. It's appropriate that the Torah should be given on me. I was involved in Kriyas Yamsuf. Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu, no. You've just disqualified yourselves because of the arrogance you've displayed. Kulchem psulim lefana, you're invalidated. Ein ritzoni lebesina shehu shafel mikulchem. I want Harsina because you're the most humble of all the mountains. So the location of Matan Torah screams humility. The giver of Torah, i.e., HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives it through Moshe Rabbeinu. We know, of course, V'ha'ish Moshe onov ma'od mikol adam. He demonstrated absolute humility, and therefore he was the appropriate person to give Torah. So, and that's really the point, because it takes a special type of humility to keep Shemitah. Similar to what the Ksaf Sofer himself suggested. When you are working in the field, you are essentially going out there and you're exposed to the sort of the vicissitudes of nature. And you said today, you took the school on a hike, and it looked like it was going to be showers. You're going to dress up. You're exposed to nature, and you feel quite humble and small. And certainly, when it comes to the produce, is this going to take root? Are there going to be buyers and sellers? Is my fruit going to grow? Is it going to be infested? Are there going to be famine? Are there going to be plagues? Is there going to be insect? It takes a humility to recognize that really HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, and therefore Shemitah is chosen. Shemitah it takes a special kind of humility to keep Shemitah, to turn around in the 7th year and say, despite all my efforts and my abilities, I'm going to actually leave the land. I've worked hard all these years, I've built it up, and I've got a good client base, and I've got good agricultural practices, and then you're going to take a step back. That needs a lot of humility. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who gives me my parnasa. And therefore, Shemitah reflects humility, and therefore, just like humility is needed for Shemitah, it's needed for Kol HaTorah Kula, and for keeping all of the mitzvahs. Rabbi Bender quoted the famous Rashi in Parshas Noach. Rashi says, it's interesting, when it lists the generations between Noach and Avraham, there's one person in particular who's got a lot of kids. The Pasuk says in Bereshis Perek Yud, Pasuk Chavav, V'yokton yolad es almoidod v'es sholef v'es chatzarmo v'es v'es, and he goes on 4 psukim listing his children. Eile eventually b'nei Yokton. Says Rashi, why was he called Yokton? Shehoya onov umaktin atzmoi, because he was a onov and he was a humble person and he made himself small. Lokach zocher lahamit kol hamishpachos halolu. That's why he merited to have such a bounty, so many children. And that, says Rabbi Bender, is really the pattern in the world. Those who hold themselves small become big. That is generally how it works in Torah. And he says a fascinating story with the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish, when he moved into Bnei Brak, which is now the Ir HaTorah with over 200,000 people, residents in Bnei Brak, when the Chazon Ish moved there in the 1930s, it was a distant cry from what it is today. He moved in, and I've seen pictures. Rehov Rabbi Kiva was sand dunes. It was nothing. And it was a small, dusty and hot town. And when he settles in the street, which now bears his name, it was actually on the outer boundaries of the city. And you could hear the cries of jackals and hyenas. And it was dangerous. And the mayor of Bnei Brak, of this small area at the time, was someone called Rabbi Geshtenkorn. And he had a light installed outside the home of the Chazon Ish. Now, one time, Rabbi Yankov Galinsky went to visit the Chazon Ish soon after this light was installed. And the Chazon Ish said to Rabbi Yankov Galinsky, "Nu Yaakov, what do you think of this light?" And the Chazon Ish answered his own question. And he said the following. He said, "When I leave my house, I see there's a large shadow which stretches into the distance. The closer I come to the electric pole, the more my shadow shrinks. When I pass underneath the light, then it sort of disappears altogether." So he says, this is what he said. "As I continue walking, the shadow once again stretches out before me, and the further I go, the longer it grows. From this, I learn that the further we take ourselves from the light, the more we feel that we are something. But the closer we get to the light, to the wisdom of Torah and to its sages of earlier generations, the more we realize how small we really are." Very beautiful idea. And that was the perspective of the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Bender writes, the modesty that comes with Amedas B'Torah, reflective of the Torah itself and the place where it was given, and the person through whom it was given. And nothing brings more blessing than being small, and that's really what makes a person big, says Rabbi Bender. So that's the first offering for tonight. The second offering is a fascinating story that I saw. I heard it originally from Rabbi Harman, but it's quoted in a sefer called Chut HaMashulish. If you look at the next box, paragraph 2. Parshas Behar contains the isurim of ribis. The pasuk says, "V'chiyomecha chicha." If your brother is struggling, help him out. But when lend him money, however, so there's an obligation. One should try and help and lend a person money, but do so without lending it with interest. So he says in this Sefer Chut HaMashulish, a fascinating episode. Let's read it together. Maisa Hoya Rabbi Akiva Zakeni. So it's a sefer written about the Chasam Sofer Rabbi Akiva Eiger and all that family, and he's referring to his Zayds Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Shemeis bepozna Oshe Gadol. One time Rabbi Akiva Eiger was a Rav in different places, and one time he was a Rav in a place called Posen, and there was an old and wealthy man who passed away. Shoyam malve beribis, and he would lend money with interest. V'lo rotzu anshe chevra kadisha lekavre. And the Chevra Kadisha were not willing to bury him at Kidnu Yershov Sach Elef Reishtes Mois for a huge amount for his Kvura. And the family were up in arms, they were very angry. And they went to the governor of the town, a non-Jewish fellow, and they complained, it's not fair, they're holding us over a barrel. And he commanded, the governor insisted that the rabbi in town, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, he summoned him to him. Shiur Rav Hamdina, he was the Rav in town, he was the Rav of the whole area. And the governor spoke to Rabbi Akiva Eiger very sternly. Why are you charging such an exorbitant sum for 4 amas, for a small burial plot? And my grandfather calmly answered as follows. In our Gemara, in our tradition, it is brought. The unique thing that someone who lends money beribis, his punishment is not to get up at Tchias HaMesim. This gentleman who passed away, his wealth was accumulated over many years by lending with interest in violation of the halacha. And therefore, when this fellow dies, on the when a regular person dies, I think I missed the line. When a person dies, we're entitled to take money to pay for his burial spot. But a regular person who has not violated this halacha, he's going to be there for a short term until Tchias HaMesim. It's a leasehold purchase until Tchias HaMesim. And then he'll come out and we can return the land. But this fellow who lent with ribis, he's not getting up at Tchias HaMesim. We're selling him this piece of land forever, a freehold. And therefore it's going to be worth a lot more. And that's why we charged him such an exorbitant sum. And this non-Jewish governor was satisfied with that answer. And he commanded the family to pay the full amount without any deduction. So, quick thinking genius of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, but it's a very powerful limit. That a person who violates this halacha is not going to get up at Tchias HaMesim, and that's how Rabbi Akiva Eiger explained the exorbitant sum that the Chevra Kadisha wanted to pay for this fellow who accumulated his money in his lifetime in violation of that halacha. Okay, let's just one final idea. Parsha Bechukosai. We need to share it over the second Sedra. So I saw this in Rabbi Rosner's Sefer in the name of Rabbi Baruch Simon, a very beautiful idea. The Parsha famously begins in Bechukosai Telechu Vesmitzvosai Tishmu Vasisem Oisam, and then all the brachas and sadly the klalas if we do not keep the Torah. Rashi says in Bechukosai Telechu Yochel Zeh Kiyam HaMitzvos. I might think it's referring to the Kiyam HaMitzvos, but it's not, because Kasheomes Vesmitzvosai Tishmu, when it says a few words later, keeping the mitzvahs, Hari Kiyam HaMitzvos Omer. The keeping of the mitzvahs is already said. Homani Mekayim es Bechukosai Telechu. So therefore, what does it mean? So therefore you should toil and sweat and work hard when it comes to Torah. So in Bechukosai Telechu is referring to Ameidos B'Torah. So there's a very beautiful piece he quoted from the Sefer Imrei Baruch, Rabbi Baruch Simon. Here we go, last box on the page. Why does it say in Bechukosai Telechu? If Rashi says that it's referring to Ameidos B'Torah, then why refer to it as Bechukosai Telechu? V'chi limud haTorah v'yigyosu davke b'mitzvah chukim. Chukim refer to the statutes of Torah. It should just say Im b'Torasi Telechu. referring to Amelus Batorah generally. You need to sweat and work hard in all of Torah, not just in the Chukim. To know and to understand, to plumb the depths of all sugyas. So therefore, why express it specifically in Bechukosai telechu? Says the Imri Baruch. Al pi hamavu b'sifrei Sforma Kadoshim likutei Torah la'agon HaKodesh b'shnei zalman mila'adi zatzal the Balatanya. So he's quoting the Sfarim of the Balatanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. She'haloshen b'chukosai hum loshen chakika. Bechukosai is not referring to the chukos, but it's referring to loshen chakika, engraving. For Kosovo b'biohinin, and he explains as follows: Ha'hefresh, the difference. What is the difference between writing and engraving? It's very simple. When you write with pen, with an ink, on paper, you've got the ink and you've got the parchment or the paper, and it's two distinct elements. It looks like it's one item, that you've got ink on paper and it looks like one entity, because it looks like it's on the paper, it's one thing. It's ultimately two separate things. You've got ink and you've got paper. In contrast, but when you've got something which is engraved in stone, it's part of the very stone. If you've engraved out of the actual stone, that is the same entity, it's the same item. It's not one item on top of another. That's why it says the expression Bechukosai, that's what it means in Bechukosai telechu, because that's the way of Torah. The Torah needs to be so ingrained in our very hearts, to be part of our very being, built in Ifrad, not separate. It's not like a jacket that you're wearing that is separate to you. It should be very much part and parcel of who we are. So therefore, Pshat says the Imre Baruch in Bechukosai telechu. Why does it say in Bechukosai telechu? If it's referring to Hamedas Batorah, it should say in Betoraisai telechu. Why limit it to Chukim? Says the Imre Baruch because it's not referring to Chukim, it's referring to Chakika, engraving. To highlight that for Hamedas Batorah, the Torah has got to become part of you. It can't be a distinct, separate element. It's got to become part of you. Lots of examples of Hamedas Batorah. Let me share with you two quickly. The first is an amazing story of Reb Shach. Reb Shach, the great Rosh Hashiva of the 20th century, and the senior Rosh Hashiva of the time, there's an amazing story in a sefer called Cheshkas HaTorah. If you look at the last box, this is by Moshe Mordechai Schlesinger on page 15. Sipel on Moran Harav Shach. Rav Shach told him, when he was a young boy in the famous yeshiva in Slutsk, it was in the First World War. And the yeshiva, the world was upside down, and the yeshiva had disbanded, and he was left on his own. He didn't know where his parents were. He told us, and he writes this in the Hagdama to Avi Ezri. The yeshiva had disbanded, everyone had left. He was a 14-year-old boy, it doesn't say here, but that's how old he was, who was left alone, without food, without clothing, without parents, without the yeshiva. And all the stories about that time that people are familiar with. He says, looking back, despite having nothing, it was the happiest year of his life. This is what he told us. He didn't have food, he didn't sleep properly, he didn't have a proper bed, he didn't have a haircut. He didn't have any money. He didn't even have money to buy Chanukah candles. The only thing he had was the Gemara Babasra. That year, when he was alone in Slutsk during the First World War with nothing, He learnt Baba Basra an astonishing 200 times. It's the longest Masechet in Shas. Sometimes he would tell us what his Seder Limud was. From Sunday through Thursday, tens of daf, and he would review it. And on Friday and Shabbos, he would review his learning. So it's an amazing thing. You want to talk about Amelus Batorah, that it becomes part, and Reb Shach was a shtickle Torah. He was a manifestation of Torah. That is what Chakuk and Bechukosai Telechu means. It became part of him. Because that year when he was without a yeshiva, without money, without clothes, without food, without parents, that's when he immersed himself fully in Torah and he became who he became. One final story. I finished reading a book about Rabbi Yitzchak Zilber. So he's quoted in Hamodia, in Hamodia last week, they quoted this, anecdotes of Amelus Batorah. So let me just read you the anecdote they've got of Rabbi Yitzchak Zilber. I've read this in the book, so it spoke to me more powerfully. Rabbi Yitzchak Zilber was exiled to a prison camp in remote Tatarstan province. The Soviet communists exiled him for refusing to report on a fellow Jew. He had the task of dragging heavy buckets of water from the Kazanka River to the camp. He worked at it for 14 hours a day so that he could be free on Shabbos. In other words, he worked an extra couple of hours so he could be free on Shabbos, not to be Mechal Shabbos. Astonishing. The round trip to the river and back took 2 hours. He made 7 trips a day. Soon he realized that this left him exhausted with no time to learn Torah. So he decided to run the distance instead of walking, as everyone else did. This while carrying 2 heavy buckets of water and in place where the winter cold averaged between -5 and -30 degrees Fahrenheit. By running instead of walking, I saved 15 minutes from each round trip. I used each of those 15 precious minutes to seclude myself in my bunk and learn from Mishnayos that I'd procured. In total, I was able to learn about 1.5 hours each day. I mastered 3 tractates in Seder Moed, and I can recite them today by heart, as well as the Maseches Kinim, a very hard Masechta in Kodshim. So it's mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling. But you see, that's what it means by Bechukosai Telechu. That why is it after the expression Bechukosai? It refers to Amelus Batorah, but why Bechukosai? It should refer to Torah generally. The answer is it's Lashon of Chakika, that it becomes engraved. It's not Diyoi ala Sefer, it becomes part of you. And these are 2 examples of giants where Torah became very part of their essence. So just to summarize, what have we said? That we started Ma Inyan et Shmita et Har Sinai. So why is Shmita chosen as an example? So we had the Ksav Sof and then the Chasam Sof from last year to teach that Torah is Min HaShamayim. Who else could give those assurances? But then we said a second answer to build on the Ksav Sof's own pshat, i.e. that to teach the importance of humility. And that it takes a special kind of humility to keep Shemitah. You can walk into the field and think, this is what I've built up, this is what I've achieved, and then to back off in year 7 takes a certain type of humility. And that really is how to achieve success in Torah. That the location of Matan Torah, the giver of Torah, all were personified humility. And that's the pattern, like the Chazon Ish with the light. That the closer, the less they hold of themselves, the bigger they become. The second idea we said was the story with Rabbi Akiva Eiger, a matter of interest, that he defended the practice of the Chevra Kadisha for this fellow who had never given any money, and they wanted to extract some money from him. After his death, they refused to bury him, and this is a fellow who lent money with interest, and when he was taken to task by the governor, he explained because of the Tchias HaMesim that he's buying a freehold, and therefore it's going to be more expensive. And then lastly, Amelus in internalizing the Torah, that's Pshat in Bechukosai Telechu, that to succeed in Torah, one has to sort of integrate it in their lives in the form of chakika as opposed to something which is external to you, like Diyah ala Klaf. Okay, we'll leave it there.